All right, so the most, are we able to put it onto the screen too, or I guess I could just send them the.
You can
PowerPoint
kind of see the
afterwards.
screen.
Okay. All right, so the most important nonverbal communication channel is the face. Anyone want to take a guess as why the face would be so important in regards to nonverbal communication?
Expression.
Because why?
Expression.
Okay, good, expressions, yes. Other reasons or explanations for why the face would be so important?
It's what we use to verbally communicate.
Okay, so it often reinforces what we're saying with our words. Yep, good. Kylie, did you have another?
I don't know, like this is what she meant, but like expresses our emotions in particular. Yeah.
Yep, good. It's also a lot harder to lie with our facial expressions, right? So we can do it, but it's a lot harder to do it. Usually people know when you're lying based on, because it's so instinctive, there is a biological, there's a biological connection between what's happening internally, cognitively, and what's being displayed on our faces. And researchers have actually found that there are 6 facial expressions that are universal across human expression. So surprise, anger, happiness, fear, disgust, and sadness have all been identified as universal. So while this class is very much steeped in looking at the cultural differences amongst communities, right, how we learn certain things, it's also important to acknowledge this research that has found that there are these differences. Now the question to think about is, like, how would we know that these 6 are universal, right? So there was an anthropologist by the name of Paul Ekman, and he wanted to study this. But he's like, if I go to, let's say, I study emotional display of in facial expressions in the US, and then I go to Japan, how do I not know that those in Japan aren't just mirroring what they've seen in like Western media, right? How do I know that it isn't something that they too have learned? How do I know that it's actually universal? And so what he did was he actually went to a tribe in Papua New Guinea that had like very little to no contact with the rest of the world. And what he did, this was back in the early 60s, I believe, he had these pictures of different actors displaying various emotions. And then he asked them, like, what do you think is happening? And to a T, all of the participants in this tribe, again, that had little to no exposure to the rest of the world, were able to tell narratives that kind of coincided with what was intended, either like a sad story or an angry story or whatever. And then they also had the individuals kind of display, they would give them emotion and be like, okay, can you show me how you would display this? And then they took a picture of it, and then they kind of matched that way. And that's kind of how they determined that these emotions were in fact universal. However, the display of emotion is also very much steeped in cultural rules or cultural display rules. These are rules that tell us like who can give or demonstrate particular emotions. When is it appropriate to demonstrate one emotion versus another emotion? Are there certain people that you can display emotion to, but perhaps it's frowned upon to display to these other people, right? There's all of these cultural rules that vary from context to context in terms of when it's appropriate to display emotion with your face. So let me ask you, what are some of the cultural display rules that kind of come to mind? Like, what are some of those things that dictate when it's appropriate or okay to convey one emotion or not? Yeah.
I probably would never, even if like I disagree with what coach tells me, like roll my eyes or show like through my body language and I don't like what you just said.
All right, good. So one display rule might be in regards to the relationship that you have with the other person. Like if the person that you are communicating with has more power or authority over you in that relationship, right, you might tend to suppress your emotional display, right? All right, so good. So that's one very clear cultural display rule. What might be some other cultural display rules? Yeah.
like if someone throws you like a surprise party or surprises you with something, you act like surprised or excited. Even if like you already knew, you still act like you didn't know.
All right, good. Yeah, so this is slightly connected to Libby's example, but I think it reminded me of this. Like in your family, if you were given a gift, are you expected to have like just a really boisterous, like jubilant reaction, like, oh, this is amazing, you shouldn't have, this is amazing, like, are you expected to have like this, like over the top kind of reaction? Yeah.
It's super weird because I don't know where I learned that from, but whenever I was a kid, my parents would be like, if you don't like a gift, tell us, because they could still return it. But I would like always pretend to be happy anyway, so I don't know where I learned that from. I
Yeah.
don't know if it was like school or something.
Yeah, you learned it from somewhere because that's not
Yeah.
that's not a biological instinct. Yeah, good. How about others? Is that your family that you're expected to just be over the top with your emotional reaction? Abby, no, that's not the case. So what does receiving a gift look like in your household?
Just like very like giving, I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you so much, like I really love it, but like very calm and just like a smile, maybe a hug afterwards, kind of thing.
Yeah. Anyone grew up in a family where like it was perfectly okay to just have like no response whatsoever? You get a gift. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of the outlier in my family because I'll get a gift and like I like, oh, this is awesome, and that's it. Like, but they don't really like getting gifts from me anymore because I'm like really grateful. I just don't show it. I'm just like, oh, nice. And I'll like change the subject. Like I don't really know what to do because I'm like, thanks, but like.
And that's considered okay in your family, or did they give you a hard time for that?
You know, mixed emotions. Depends on which family member it's from. But yeah, I would say they aren't a huge fan of it, but like I just don't know. And everyone else in my family loves it. They're, oh, this is awesome, but I'm just like, nice, and that's it. So it's a little funky.
All right, good. So going back to our cultural display rules, we got one, when you're communicating with somebody that has more power than you. Two, when you were the kind of the guest of honor at like this occasion, like a surprise party, but there's probably a lot of other similar events. Good. Other cultural display rules that kind of come to mind? Yeah.
Maybe like going back to well, maybe if you're like, someone cooks something for you, if you're eating something and you don't like it, kind of could tell on your face if you don't like it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yes. In so many different settings, right, we are taught to kind of suppress negative emotion, right? Whether it's with somebody with more power than us, or somebody's been treating us to something, whether it's dinner or a gift. And so we need to show like these positive facial expressions. Good. Any other cultural display rules that come to mind? I mean, I think about in terms of like how gender informs, right? What is considered to be acceptable or not. I also think about this in terms of context. You know, I marvel at some of the things that like our sport coaches are able to quote unquote get away with in terms of their facial expressions with their players, right? Things that would not fly with a professor teaching students, or in terms of how they communicate to referees, right? So there are all of these display rules that kind of inform when it's okay and when it's not okay. Now, there's a significant connection between individualism and collectivism and facial expressions. So in an individualistic society, oftentimes we are encouraged more to display our emotions, right? That if you are unhappy with something, to say that, or if you're excited about something, to show that. That's considered acceptable. Although, as we've already talked about, even within an individualistic society, there are these different rules that kind of constrain when you can or can't. In collectivist societies, however, there's much more of a belief that if you display like really huge reactions, really positive or really negative, that might disrupt the harmony in the group. So you need to mute and be more careful with how you display your facial expressions. And we got a good taste of this from our article that we read for Tuesday's class, right? Jen Van Atken's article talking about the Spanish teachers in Thailand. We see that play out, right? How collectivism and individualism was informing the level of expressiveness that the individuals that were interviewed or looked at in that study were displaying. All right, the second nonverbal channel is kinesics. So kinesics refers to movement of the body, right? Refers to movement of the body, right? So we can think about kneeling protests as a form of kinesic communication, and certainly for some people that was considered controversial, right? Obviously that was an indication of kinesic differences in communication. The Japanese bow is a really interesting one. Has anyone ever like studied or looked at the Japanese bow? So there's like 20 different settings or situations where you would bow, and each one has a different like angle or like a degree to bow in regards to the different situation, right? So you bow when you greet someone, you bow when like you've come into an agreement with that person. If you're apologizing, you bow. If you're a sales attendant, you bow, right? There's all of these different things. I can't actually name all of them, but there's like 20 different, and each one is like, depending on the situation, whether it's like a 5-degree bow or a 10-degree bow. And so, so I spent some time in Japan and trying to adapt to this particular kinesic communication, and probably not very successfully or very well. But it was an effort on my part to try to match what was expected of me in regards to kinesics. Now there are different types of kinesic communication. One is emblems. So these are gestures that have precise translations. Some of you have taken other communication classes, so hopefully you remember this terminology. Trying to think of specific gestures that have meaning, right? The okay sign would be one, right? Thumbs up, meaning good job. I'll give you an example of an emblem that caused me some confusion. In my very first day teaching in China, I was talking with a student after class, and she began to talk with me, and she began to make this gesture. Now, if I made this gesture, like if I was doing this gesture in class, like how do you interpret this gesture?
Crazy.
Okay, yeah, I'm crazy, right? So this student that I had just met was day one of our class. I'm thinking in my head, why is she telling me that she's crazy? I was really confused. But in fact, anyone know what that gesture might mean?
She's thinking?
She was thinking, and I came to learn that after that initial conversation. But that was a good example of kinesic communication. I mean, other examples, this gesture, what does this gesture mean to you?
Come here.
All right, come here. There are parts in China where it actually means go away. The opposite interpretation. So examples of emblem communication. So former President George H.W. Bush got in some controversy in Australia for making a very obscene gesture, and that obscene gesture was the backwards peace sign, which in Australia was interpreted, just kind of like screw you. Another example, his son, 20 years later, President George W. Bush, this is his inaugural address, or short, I guess right after his inaugural address, his inaugural address, this is what it was. He's making this gesture, and I'm sure most, if not all of you know what that is. What is that gesture reference to?
Rock on. I love you.
Mess with the boy, you're gonna get the line.
No. Oh, see, this is
Where I come from, it means like yee, like yee-haw.
no, there's a specific meaning behind what this means. Is nobody from Texas? No? So this is the,
Is it the Longhorns?
yeah, this is the symbol for the University of Texas, and it means hook'em horns. Does nothing. Claire, you're familiar with the hook 'em horns. So this is an emblem. Now, in Norway, people watching from home at Norway, watching this gesture, would have thought to themselves, why is the new president of the United States like a Satanist? Because they would have interpreted it as this like a satanic symbol. So in addition to differences in emblems, we also have differences in illustrators. So illustrators refers to gestures that amplify our verbal message, right? So this is like this gesture right here. This is an illustrator, right? There's no like definition to this, right? It's only emphasizing the meaning. And again, I know for some of you this is like review because you've had other communication classes. But in terms of intercultural communication, communities or culture groups will vary in terms of what is considered to be an acceptable usage or amount of illustrators. So in some culture communities, it's very much encouraged to speak with your hands, right? You speak with your hands and you speak a lot with your hands and very big hand reactions. Whereas in other places, that's considered to be kind of superficial, right? So you want to keep your hand motions to a minimum, right? So this is a cultural difference in regards to kinesic communication.
Welcome to the world's biggest sports betting arena, B-Win.
So another example of kinesic communication at work. Is anyone familiar with what you just saw? What that is? Sounds?
I have some similar family members, so I've seen some stuff like that.
Okay. Do you know what the name of the?
I don't know the name, but isn't it a warrior? Warriors do it before battle or something.
Yes, historically that was the. And anyone know what part of the world or specifically this tradition is found? Yeah.
New Zealand.
All right. Do you know the name of it?
Something black.
Well, so the All Blacks rugby team
Yeah.
has appropriated this, which I'll talk more about in just a second. Mhm. Yes. So this is known as the haka. It was a tradition. Oh, Max, did you know it?
I was close. It was not right, but I was a good guess.
So this is a traditional. Historically, it was a part of a war ritual. Like as you were going into battle, it was a way to intimidate your foes, your enemy, your opposition. But the country of New Zealand has very much adopted or appropriated it as a part of their way of doing things. The All Black rugby team, which is the most popular rugby team in New Zealand, uses it before their big matches and so forth. But clearly you saw, I love the faces of like James Harden and Fareed, I think his name is something Fareed. I love their reactions. They're just like, don't.
Welcome to.
All right, so let me give you another example of a kinesic intercultural communication. This would be an illustrator.
Popular rallying cry at Chiefs games, but now some Native Americans are asking fans to stop the chop. With the Chiefs in the playoffs, the controversy is back in the spotlight, some calling the action offensive, derogatory, and disrespectful. All new here at 5 for you. 41 Action News reporter Ariel Rothfeld explains why some say it's time to tackle the issue again.
Haskell Indian Nations University prides itself on teaching and preserving Native American history. And with the recent
spotlight of success on the Kansas City Chiefs, many here are hoping it opens up a conversation about fan behavior they believe is offensive. At a Kansas City Chiefs game, it's a widely popular gesture, the tomahawk chop. But at this university in Lawrence, it's considered more racist and offensive.
That is part of the whole thing that just becomes very disturbing to me.
Dr. Daniel Wildcat is a professor of Indigenous and American Studies at Haskell Indian Nations University. When it comes to football, he argues Chiefs fans are behind the times.
We do find it incredibly disrespectful when a non-native person tries to dress up like a, quote, chief. It's an act, it's more than just putting on a hat.
Last year, the Chiefs partnered with the American Indian Center of the Great Plains to help honor traditions, which included blessing the war drum hit before each game. But now, many would like to see fans change their ways.
Our culture was denied of us. It was beaten out of us. It was told that it was uncivilized, it was wrong.
To end what they consider a mockery of indigenous ways.
You'd be hard-pressed today to identify a feature of popular culture that has more influence than professional athletics. To me, this is a great teachable moment.
Reporting in Lawrence, Ariel Rothfield, 41 Action News.
So again, just another example of an illustrator or an intercultural difference in perception of what this particular gesture means, whether it's a way to get your fan base riled up or disrespectful to traditions of indigenous communities in this country. All right, so for my next nonverbal communication channel, Kyle, would you kind of help me with the demonstration here?
Yeah, Kyle.
All right, so I know you play on the baseball team, yes. So tell me about like when you first started playing baseball and how you knew like baseball was going to be like your favorite sport.
Okay, just explain it.
Uh-huh.
So I guess I started playing when I was like around 4 years old, and it's kind of forced upon me. It's not like I kind of enjoyed it at first, but after playing a couple of years, I don't know, I thought I kind of got good at it, and it's just something that always stayed with me. And then starting to watch professional baseball and stuff, it just always became like a, you know, I just kind of just admired those guys, and it just always, it just always was just something I always wanted to do.
So, but what age specifically did you learn that like you were going to do this?
I don't know, like 8 or something. I don't know. Man, this seems really close right now.
All right, the next one, the next nonverbal communication channel is proxemics. So communication by the use of space. So, Kyle, at what point did you start to get nervous in the interaction?
Oh man, I just kind of sensed you just getting closer and closer, but then when you were probably about, I don't know, like 6 inches from me, that's when I was like, okay, this dude's really close. I get your joke now.
Yes. So, Elijah, maybe I'll do a little bit of demonstration with you as well. So, I'm going to just start walking closer to you. When I get to the point where you feel that's too close, tell me to stop. Okay? All right. Right there? Okay, that's about, what is it, about 4 feet maybe? Okay. So in individualistic societies, we tend to prefer a little bit more of a larger personal bubble between us, right? In collectivist societies, there tends to be more acceptability with being in close quarters with one another. I remember many experiences walking down the street with friends in China, and we would be like, our shoulders, like it'd be our shoulders rubbing, and that instinct was to kind of like move to the side, but the point was that that my friends were a lot more comfortable being in very close contact with each other. So something for you to think about is, like, what is your level of comfortability? We saw Elijah's level of comfort, we saw Kyle's level of comfort. Like, what is your level of comfortability with people standing really, really close to you? In the there's an interesting example of proxemics talked about in the Lane article. They talked about the airplane seats. So technically speaking, you have the ability when you're on an airplane to move your seat back. I mean, it's not much. It's like here to here. I mean, that's about how much room. But if you're behind the person, that really does, especially for people who have long legs like myself, and as I look around the room, a lot of you are very tall people as well. That's very discomforting, right, to have somebody encroach upon your leg room. So my question for you is, do you think it's appropriate or okay, even though you may have the option to move your seat back, do you feel that you have an ethical obligation to not do that to protect against the leg room behind you? So I'm going to have you to say, we haven't talked to the people next to us for a while, so say hello to the person next to you. Do you think that's appropriate to be able to move your
Do you feel obligated to